But I guess as we warm up, what have y'all been doing on this lovely Sunday? How's the Sunday going?
Good. What did I do that today? I don't know. I meditated this morning.
Nice.
I was listening to a lot of documentaries on the Tao because I was really nervous.
Oh,
Oh, you did
this is
research?
great.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I took notes. I was like, oh man.
Let me. I would like to just go off of that note real quick. So I'm doing Asia. This is good that you're here.
Great.
I mean, of course, it's good that you're here. This would be happening without the next thing I'm about to say. But I'm doing a class assignment right now on religion and recovery and how they interact, and if they don't, something like that. And I have something like I have to have 3 pieces of a 5-piece project done by November 3rd, and I forgot all about it
You're making good time.
until like this week. So this is perfect.
Yeah, you're good. We'll get you some content. We'll figure it out.
Great. Don't worry about content. Let's. I just said that so that we all know what I have writing on this interview.
Your college
pressure.
education.
But have some fun.
I think it's interesting.
By the way, what got you, like, how long have you been interested in the Dao or the Dao De Jing?
Well, I actually just discovered it within the last couple months for sure. But I feel like everything that it talks about is something that I've been living through for a long time. So that's maybe part of the reason why it's landed a little bit, and why I like it so much, or why it like kind of blew my mind a little bit.
How did you discover it?
YouTube.
That's how everyone discovers everything.
That's the library. That's the academy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was? Did you go down a rabbit hole and you discovered it, or just you by happenstance?
Yeah, a little bit.
So you're watching yoga videos, and then it's
I actually don't like
Jordan Peterson, and then Dao.
Yoga. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, that's the natural progression.
Jordan Peterson.
It's just one of those things that it popped up in my like things you might like, and I think the title was like effortless living, and I was like, ooh, yes, effortless living. And then I just fell down that rabbit hole a little bit, and it helps you really come to terms with like where you are in your life. And I think when you're constantly feeling uncomfortable, feeling like that, you could be doing more, frustrated about where you've been, like not sure what to do next, is just, something that you can look at and remind yourself that it's okay to like take a breath. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put that, because it's so easy with living in general. There's a tendency to become really constricted. It's kind of like we've talked about this, Jody, when you're like fighting, you forget to breathe. It's very easy to forget to exhale. So I don't know, like the Tao using this kind of as a system to just remember to breathe. I don't know, it does kind of make things a little bit effortless if you just remember to do the one simple thing to keep you alive.
And you know what? I think, for me, I really have a lot of big expectations around like what I want to do, where I want to be, like what I thought my life would be like, all these things. And it's really easy, especially I think post-pandemic, you just kind of, and I don't know, the older you get, like the optimism kind of starts to fade, and like you just feel a little more crushed by the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I never thought I would be like that. I was like, no.
Pretty sure we made like 4 or 5 podcasts specifically about that one thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a great comfort to know that other people also feel like that. But I feel like some of my darkest moments, just coming to this realization that like I don't have to do anything. Like when I approach life from my egoic self or my small self, it feels overwhelming. But when I recognize that I have, this universal conscious energy that's just inhabiting my body, that's, living through my incarnation, it becomes less about like, oh my God, like what are all, the things I need to do? How am I supposed to plan out the next 5 years, next 10 years? Like, what are all my goals? Like, whatever. It's good to have that stuff, right? Listen to the call of your heart, let that direct you. But at the same time, if I just, show up and just do my best every day, whatever that means, right? Doesn't mean that I'm checking everything off my to-do list, but like if I show up in integrity, I show up trying my best, the universe will meet me halfway and it'll, use my incarnation in the way that best serves hopefully the highest good of all, right? And that's all we can ask for.
It's kind of like putting in what you get back.
Mm-hmm.
Or getting back what you put in. I forgot how that goes. But yeah. Like you come in more accepting and also giving, then obviously people or things or the world will reflect that back at you, mainly because you're a little bit more open and receptive to it as well.
Mm-hmm. And you're not clinging to what you want life to show you, which is a big one.
Now, I guess
I think that one shook Tom. Did you see him sit for a second?
Like so many different ways to go with that. But I want to get back to that. But I think it's a good point to make where being present is a form of investment. So like when you are investing your time or energy into something, if we want to say just recovery in general, there is always going to be something that comes back to you. Just by the, like a natural, like an inherent magic that's going on in that relationship.
Yeah. I love that you use the word magic, because I love magic, and I think the world is, just the fact of existence is inherently magical. Nothing has to exist, right? None of this has to be here, but like it is, and there are, it's so beautiful in so many ways. And that magic, I think sometimes we see people and we think like those people are magical, but it's really not that, like we're all conduits of the same magic. We're all a part of the same magic. It's just whether or not you choose to pay attention to it or cultivate it so that, you can allow it to move through you a little more freely,
Yeah, well, it goes back to what you were talking about with this kind of this incarnated form that we're in, being this, I don't know, like being able to become a vessel of that spirit, that force, that magic that moves through us all. But the practice is kind of, I guess, to use like karma, removing the things in the way of you being a more conducive vessel for that.
I think while we're talking about vessels and magic, we should probably introduce all of the vessels on this podcast right now. So this is Tom and Jody sitting with Aja, who if you guys have listened to any previous episodes, I've mentioned a lot as simply my yoga teacher. I do a pretty good impression of you in like 2 episodes ago.
Nice.
I don't know, yeah.
Would you like to do it?
The impression? Or would she like to do the thing that I impress?
Why don't you both do it and I'll judge who did it best.
Okay.
And then we can, that'll be the start of the episode.
That's like Robert Downey Jr. losing in a Robert Downey Jr. lookalike contest.
Did that happen?
But he's still Robert Downey Jr.
He still wins at life,
Yes.
Okay, yeah, he's great. Okay, so I'm Robert Downey Jr. and I'm leading a yoga class, and Jody is in a very somatic situation. He's deep within his thoughts and memories and emotions, and then suddenly I hear yogis, and then I'm transported right back into the yoga studio. How did I do?
That was great. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, good job, yogis. I like to use too. Good job living. Good job being humans. It's hard. Yeah, I hope it doesn't pull you back too much, that you're still integrated in that.
No, it's like a soft launch. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yogis. Now I'm thinking about it too. It's like when you say a word so much and you can't even, it doesn't even sound like a word anymore. Um, Yogis. Yogi.
You do it with this like this huge exhale that just like yeah, there it is.
yeah, now I feel like we're in it.
Yeah, now
Like
we're in it.
now we can do this.
So that was the warm up then.
Yeah, I think so.
Great.
So tell us about yourself. Like how did you get into yoga?
By accident. I
like you slipped and fell in downward dog, or
yeah, I was like, whoopsies. Now I've got a yoga mat. What the heck? No, I actually, there's a girl in my high school named Rosalie Abbey, and she was absolutely wonderful, beautiful girl. I actually ran into her this summer crossing the street, and she was really into yoga. And I thought, if she's this wonderful person, she does yoga, I need to check this out. So she invited me to go to a yoga class, and I went to the wrong studio and interrupted a class, which as a yoga teacher now, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Like I knocked on the door, or they were in the middle of class. Is horrible. So I came back later and ended up being the only person in the class, which is also relatively rare. And it was raining. I remember it was raining. It was a Wednesday night. It was dark out, maybe like 7:30, 8 o'clock. She lit all these candles and we just had a one-on-one yoga session. And I was like, wait, this is yoga? Like for the first time in my life, I felt held. I felt safe. I felt, just soft. I felt so good. And I was like, I have to keep doing this. And I started going back to that studio. It was Yoga Tree in Andersonville.
Oh, I know Yoga Tree.
Mm-hmm. And I went to that studio for the entirety of, college and summers. And then I was going in almost all the time in Madison. And I don't know, I wasn't looking for it to kind of transform me. I just liked, the practice of it. And I'm a relatively active, athletic person. So, and it was just surprising to me because I went in there thinking like, oh, I'm so athletic, like this is gonna be no problem. And then I was like, oh my God, how do people stay in down dog so long? Like this is so hard. But it really helped me to be present. I didn't even know about the idea of presence until I started doing yoga. And then coming into Shavasana and hearing, Lance say, just watch your thoughts as they arise and fall away, let things be as they are, like let all the sounds move through you. Not quite that. That's kind of what I say, but in his own way. And then I remember sitting one night outside. It was a summer night, and I didn't think about anything for a good 3-4 minutes. And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, that's it. That was presence. That's what they're talking about. And I was like, oh, that was nice, So yeah, I guess that was kind of my introduction to yoga personally. And then I can tell you the story of how I became a yoga teacher if you want.
Yeah. Why not?
I love this story.
Let's do it.
Because it really sort of solidifies the presence of the universe in my life. And I really feel, like I was raised by the universe, which we all are. But, I really leaned on the universe and still do. So fast forward, graduated from college. This was maybe 2-3 weeks after graduation. I was working in the service industry. I had a degree in art. I didn't know where I was going with my life. I didn't know what I was going to do next. My parents were not really helpful in that realm. So I was just kind of very lost and afraid and just, kind of worried. And I was working at this really nice restaurant in Madison, and somebody told me I was polishing glassware in the back, and they're like, oh my God, did you know about the celebrity sighting? And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, Robert Downey Jr. is in the restaurant. And when I started doing yoga and I first learned about intentions, they're like, you could send your love to somebody, blah, blah. Every single time it was, I want to send my love to Robert Downey Jr. I hope he's doing well. He inspired me so much as Iron Man through his own personal life. He's a comeback kid. And I felt like I had so much potential, but through my addictions, I wasn't reaching that potential, and I couldn't figure out, why or what to do about it. And so I would always, and he was a yogi, at that point he was a yogi and sober. And so I just set my intentions to him for the first 1.5 to 2 years I was doing yoga every single time. And so when they said that and they're like, yeah, Robert Downey Jr. in the restaurant, I freaked out. And I went through the kitchen, then I walked through the restaurant right by his table to confirm. And it was him. And then I got to the hallway and I started crying naturally. So my boss told me that I had to go home. And obviously, I did not want to leave the restaurant because Robert Downey Jr. is there. So instead, I left and I hid outside behind the bike rack so that no one would know. And then when he was done with his meal and came out, I emerged. And it was a very fancy restaurant. So I'm in like a black velvet dress and I have my makeup done and my hair up, but I'm like crying and I have been crying. So I must have looked crazy. And I can barely form words. And his friends are like, oh my God, you want this like girl to come up to you? And he's like, it's okay. It's okay. And I was like, oh my God, I love you. Like, thank you. Like I wasn't really even saying anything, that was coherent. And he just took my hands and I was crying and he was like, hey, it's okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. He gave me a hug and then we parted ways and it was just amazing. And I was, ecstatic. And the next day I came to work and they took me in the office and obviously fired me because that was unprofessional. And I couldn't blame them, like I was like, I kind of knew, as soon as they brought me in the office, I was like, okay, I see what's happening. But now I was graduated. I had no direction. Now I had no job. I had nothing to do with the rest of the summer. And that same day I went to the grocery store and my yoga teacher was walking out. I was walking in and she was like, hey, what's up? I told her what happened. She's like, oh, it's so cool. She's like, what are you going to do? I was like, I don't know. She's like, why don't you go get your yoga instructor's license? And then I did because I had some graduation money and now I'm a yoga teacher thanks to Robert Downey Jr. So.
And the boss who fired you.
Yeah. And thank God that, they fired me, I guess.
Wow.
That's
so incredible.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I didn't realize Robert Downey Jr. was a yogi.
Yes.
I also really liked your Robert Downey Jr. impression that you just did. That's good.
Oh, yeah? You thought it was good?
Yeah.
I still remember what he was wearing, too. He was wearing like a camo shirt. He had black rimmed sunglasses, but the lenses were pink. And I was like, nice.
Yeah, that sounds like Robert Downey Jr. For sure.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so providential. And then you just went out and you got your license.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Got my license and started teaching in Chicago, started teaching at Uptown Fitness, which is a gym that doesn't exist anymore thanks to COVID. I mean, there's no surprise there. But
I remember that gym.
Do you remember it?
Yeah, right next to the Jewel, Osco.
Yeah. Yep, it was that one. And then I started, and I was practicing at Namaskar, which is where I work now, but Alexandra asked me to start subbing there, and then I got my 300 hour in Costa Rica, and then she asked me to start taking on some classes, maybe teaching, and it's just kind of snowballed. You know how life is.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yes.
I wonder, like, so what, Jody?
I was just saying, yes, Tom. Yes.
Well, I have so many, I guess to go back a little bit, when you were just practicing yoga and if this is going, of course, this would be a continuing thing, but like, what were the parts of yoga when you were first getting into it that were really like clicking for you in terms of your life off the mat?
That's a great question. Well, honestly, when I first started yoga, it was mostly physical, which I think it is for everyone, right? Like, and depending on where you're going, like you might not have teachers that are really expressing the other parts of yoga, like the meditation and whatnot. Learning to breathe with my movement was a game changer, right? And that was all I was focused on for the first, 2 years or something. Like that was really all it was. And that's where the presence and the focus and like clarity of mind sort of started to come in. And I think like when it comes to, I know this is an addiction podcast, to some extent, right?
To some extent.
To some extent.
I think we might, maybe a recovery podcast.
Recovery. Yeah. Much better.
We're not pro-addiction, by the way. It's a podcast.
But yeah, I think like starting to become present helped me to sort of realize just how out of balance my life was. And, it didn't change things for me right away, but it gave me the wherewithal to start making changes. And like, I know when you invited me to do this podcast, Jody, you're like, maybe you could speak to your recovery and stuff like that. And I was thinking about that. And what I realized is that my recovery was never so much like, oh no, I got to stop and like, put a pause in it. It was more so like a falling in love with sobriety, right? So it wasn't so much a pushing away of like the things that I was addicted to and leaning on, whatever. It was more this like falling in love with sobriety. And then naturally that stuff just started to not find as much of a home or a place in my life anymore. And obviously, like you go back and forth so much. But my reactions to, a night out drinking started to become very different. And all of this is like really gradual. But, I think that was a big part of it, was not this like cold turkey, whatever. It was the first time I was ever sober, since I had started drinking, was my first yoga training. And that's when I realized, holy shit, I haven't had 3 weeks of not drinking alcohol in the last like 6 years, 7 years. Whoopsies. So
that's
Well,
crazy. That's such a different story than I had, because mine was very much like, I must stop or I will die. And then I hated sobriety and I did not fall
But
in
you
love with
found
it.
yoga. Did you find yoga after sobriety?
Yeah.
Okay,
I found
go.
yoga the first time I got sober, which was when I was 26.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it because I was in this god awful relationship and I had not stopped drinking for, I grew up drinking, you know what I mean? And I always wanted to box and like get into like martial arts and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to this sort of like McDojo boxing gym that was like for like, um, and they had, like jujitsu and all the stuff I do now, but they also had yoga. And I started doing yoga in like a jujitsu gym through this teacher. Her name was Victoria. And that was all I did. I didn't do any of the boxing or anything like that. I just kept doing yoga. I had this terrible job. None of my friends were sober. And so I was like the only one that was like trying to go down this
That's
path.
hard.
Well, my boss was sober, but he was super mean and was very into AA and would like show up at my house to like take me to AA. And so I used yoga as a way to be like, oh no, I got to go to a yoga class. Can't go to AA with you, you fucking jerk. And so I just kept doing that more and more. And then of course, like I would relapse, and every time I'd come back and try to do sobriety again, I would end up trying to do yoga. And so this is like over the course of like 10 years. So at one point I went to Yoga Tree. And I remember it was like, it was one of the first like times I'd gotten sober here in Chicago. And I sat in a class and it was very much like Namaskar, because I noticed that over the last 10 years, yoga kind of went from like hippy dippy reading you a poem kind of yoga to like power core, more fitness yoga. And I was like, no, I need someone to like do what you do, like burn incense. I need like the grounding. I need all of that. Because that's what Victoria did. Even though we were like on like jujitsu mats, she like still like played the music and all this stuff. But I was at Yoga Tree and it was very much like in that realm, except it's right next to that bar. And it was like, I think it was...
Especially if the Cubs are playing or something.
I think it was like it was something bigger than that. I think it was like St. Patrick's Day. And so we're trying to do Savasana in the middle of St. Patrick's Day and the bar is just going crazy next door. And it was super distracting within like my first, 30 days of sobriety. And so, I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't go to that gym. And then I hadn't found Namaskar yet. So I was like still looking around, and then eventually some time had passed. And then this time I was like hardcore about it. I found Namaskar. And then right when I got there, I was like digging my toes in. I was like, this is where I'm going to be.
Yeah. You can tell the energy.
Oh yeah. It was great. Yeah. Plus it's just like, there's not a lot I find in Chicago. There's not a lot of studios that offer that sort of, that type of yoga. Like there's a lot
I
of,
feel like it's more a little more authentic yoga,
yeah,
not so corporate, whitewashed, the essence of yoga and more trying to get back to the roots.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I was really thirsting for. Because I did sit in on some classes that were like, I remember I did one that was like yoga to the 90s. So we were doing like yoga to Hansen and stuff like that, which I think I brought up on the podcast before. And I was like, it's too loud. I need like Tibetan throat singing for me to get grounded.
Right. And like it's fun, but it is kind of taking away. Like if I'm listening to music, and I love listening to music, and sometimes some yoga teachers have some good jams on, but then I'm in my down dog, like kind of like moving around, like I want to dance. I'm not quite as focused as when there's just somebody chanting or
Yeah,
sound bowls or something.
yeah. And it's got to be good music.
Mm-hmm.
Like David picks great music and
Mm-hmm.
he plays like a lot of like jams and stuff like that. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just like sound bowls, but sometimes it's bad. And it
Mm-hmm.
really takes you out of it.
That's fair.
Well, would you explain the, um, or just like an overview of what kind of the roots of yoga is, like what you were just talking about, like in comparison or in contrast to the more, I guess, westernized McDonald's power yoga that y'all were saying. Like what is it that makes your studio and your practice different than that?
Um, I mean, a lot of what we do in the Western world is for profit or for money, right? And in the process, I think a lot of things get lost. So, people turn to yoga or look at yoga at first, maybe as like a workout, which, like, honestly, if that's what gets you in the door, like, who cares? But then when you have teachers who are really focused on the physical practice, really focused on the asana. When you go to core power and they tell you to bring some weights over to your mat, right? Like that's not yoga, right? We're doing the asana. And like, I said earlier, it was matching the breath to the movement, kind of like when you're running or something and you're getting that run like right in step with, your stride. It's kind of like that, right? Where it takes you out. And the point of yoga, like yoga is union, right? Yoga is a way to kind of facilitate the divine conscious universal energy within you so that you're not perceiving and living your life straight from the ego or straight from this idea of your little self. You have a little self, you have your dharma, you have your path that you're meant to walk and the things that you're meant to facilitate or bring to the world, which is great, right? We all need to like do our own thing. We're all part of this like big tapestry of life, but to be doing so in a way that is kind of more heart centered than head centered, right? Like it's more again just facilitating this like non-judgmental, loving, conscious awareness, and that stems from meditation. Sort of once you allow yourself to let go of the narratives that you're always holding, the beliefs that you're always holding, you kind of give yourself pause to quiet down. And if you've never meditated before, it's it's very rejuvenating, but you're not sleeping, right? But it feels very rejuvenating. And our bodies crave that. Like we live in a world that is, endless summer, go, go, go. A lot of young energy trying to, get after the next thing. This idea of like endless growth, like endless profit, endless growth. Like that's just not the way that nature works, right? Nature works in cycles, right? Nature works in harmony, nature works in balance. Like there is no just like growth without repercussion, which is, exploitation of resources, or just, exhausting yourself. So I think like that's really a big difference when you're looking for yoga studios. You'll notice like some of them are a little more grounded in the idea of yoga as like a physical practice and like kind of, I think that they call it peacock consciousness, where you're like, oh, look at how like chill I am, right? Well, if you have to talk about it all the time, you're probably not that chill. Versus just like doing the practice as a way, almost like as a ritual or as an offering to the greater whole or the greater, whatever else is out there, and not so much to like check it off your list. Oh, I went to yoga today.
It's
Yeah,
about being
that's
present, right?
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Which brings us back to Taoism, the theme of the
Well, yeah.
podcast,
The theme of
theme of this
right.
episode,
Yeah,
Taoism.
well,
Yeah.
the more Asia, the more you are talking about this, I just go like, we should block off like a few more hours
Oh,
to talk.
I'm
Um,
free. So however long you guys
um,
want to take, you do what you gotta do.
I did.
Let's
I
just keep
wanted
in mind I
to.
have to edit all of this, so it's like double my time. I'm just kidding. Let's take all of our
So
time.
let's give it more content to edit.
Before I do want to get to Taoism because I'm interested to hear your perspective on it. But you
Tom
made me
has a
think of this.
deep hatred for Buddhism. He can't stand it. Look at his face. I just outed him.
I love Taoism because it's not Buddhism.
Oh wow.
There's this thing. Let's see. You were making me think of this today in this recovery group that I'm in. We did a reading that covered this quote from this book by Gerald May. It's called Addiction and Grace, and he says that addiction uses up our spiritual desire. It drains away our deepest and true desire, that inner flow and life force, which makes us long and pant for running streams. And that's, you just made me think of that because like how you described your beginning to move away in like falling in love with sobriety is so different than what Jody and I have talked about
Yeah.
on the podcast. Cause it's been a lot of like tapping out and going, please God, just help me not do this anymore. But you're like, it's such a nice, gentle moving into right relation with yourself that it feels more like not just healthy, but it has like an inherent longevity to it where when you're just saying please no more, there is that risk of relapse just because you're just cutting something off, you're not moving into something new.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it changes the mindset. Like I always, when people congratulate me for being sober, I'm always like, oh, thank you for clapping for me for not doing something. It's like the only thing people are like, oh, good job, you didn't do one
I mean,
thing.
to be fair, it is very challenging, especially considering, I think how many people don't quite get it, and we have such a lax relationship, especially to alcohol, where it's like, oh, but just, like, don't you just want to have a glass of wine? It's like, yes, and like there's a lot that follows that, and it is challenging. You do deserve a round of applause.
Yeah, thank you. We all do. Actually, I think there's a button on this thing.
Oh, great. Wow.
There we go. That's for everyone listening too. If you're sober. If you're not, you know what, Austin, if you're not. But when you phrase it like you fell in love with sobriety, it makes it feel more active.
Well, it also romanticizes it quite a bit.
It does. It calls that thinking that you were talking about before we started, that kind of like effortless living, that where you're falling in love with sobriety as like a gradual, like beholding sobriety and just, I don't know, that feels
like a healthy relationship, like it happened over time. It's not like you just like went right into it and you're like, we're in love now,
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. It's not impulsive. It's this like being drawn to sobriety and but in much bigger than that, right? It's being drawn to like loving yourself and being in relation with the universe and all of this other stuff like that. It feels very woo-way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you say woo-way?
Woo-way, effortless action. So woo-way is
how do you spell that?
I think it's like
WUWEI.
Oh.
Jody, I don't mean to say this on record, but like that was a perfect segue into Taoism.
That was great.
Now here we are.
Wu-wei. I'm just sorry. I didn't do my research.
Yeah, no, the idea of effortless action or non-doing. And I think like one of the things that meditation helps with in terms of like trying to integrate that into your life is like when you are living less in the headspace of like being attached to the idea that you have to get these things done or else, and instead moving from a place of, what, and honestly, I feel this like as someone with ADHD, like this idea that we kind of, people with ADHD kind of like work in eddies where you're like kind of doing a little bit here and then you get distracted, you do a little bit here, but it's like, if you try too hard to force yourself to work in a different way, nothing's going to get done. Right. So it's like just going with the flow, essentially. Right. And it doesn't mean that you can't put in action. Right. So again, and I think like all of this is just trying to, reconcile two opposite ends of the spectrum where you do have to put in a little bit of effort. You got to tune in and see like, what is calling to you? Like, obviously, if everyone had just sat at home all day and like played video games, like nothing would get done, right? But like people have a natural calling to go want to do things. So to honor that, but to not honor it from like this sort of logical space, to honor it from this heart space, which means that if you wake up and like you're like, oh my God, like I don't know what's going on, but like I'm exhausted today, like I can't do all 20 of these things on my list. I'm going to do 3 of these things on my list. And to be okay with that, to not like freak out about it. When you look outside and you see nature, you're not like worried about like, how does this tree know how to become a tree? Like, how does a squirrel know how to be a squirrel? How does a dog know how to be a dog? They just know how to do that because that's who they are. And then as humans, we've, especially, in this day and age, we've become so detached from that, as feeling ourselves as separate, which is like our, collective sort of obsession with the ego, that we forgot that there is something within us that knows what to do. And if we can surrender to that, then, life becomes a little easier. And again, part of that surrender is accepting that you don't know who you're supposed to be, like you don't. And so like, let life show you, and just try to move through every step with intention, with presence, in integrity, right? Instead of, doing things for the sake of like, oh, this is going to make me, look good, or this is going to look good on my resume or whatever, right? Like do it from your heart.
Let's have a moment let's take a moment to just process.
Well, I want to know, Jody, I want to know what you think about that, because we've been talking about, this might be the way that our brains work, and it also might be kind of an addictive personality trait, but there is a strong need to have something going on all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when we were doing comedy, remember we were like, yeah, we want to do 10 shows a week. We have to do 10 shows a week. If we don't do 10 shows a week, we're never going to make it. And it turns out we didn't make it, even though we did all that. And, we're making it. We're doing okay.
I was going to say that's all
No,
perspective.
but that's exactly what Asia's saying, though. It's like following doing the next thing, doing the thing that you're being led to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing that I struggled with, especially in early sobriety in that regard, like you were saying, like listen instinctually to what you want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was that for me, because I had been drinking for so long, it was sort of clouded by my own addiction. And so it was like hard for me to get through to my heart because I couldn't quite figure out what it was I wanted to do. And I wanted to do so much. I wanted to do everything, but I also wanted to get drunk all the time. And so it was like, okay, well, first I have to figure out what I don't want to do, which is exactly what I really want to do, which is to get drunk all the time, because then I can't do all these other things. And so the first couple of years of my sobriety is a lot of me being like, okay, well, now that I'm sober, I can try this, I can try that, I can do this. And like in this sort of experimental phase of figuring out, what I want to do while also dealing with those like, regrets and shame that come with sobriety, and like trying not to drink, trying not to follow what feels instinctual, which is to fall right back into your addiction. So yeah, I guess that's really, I mean, I love what you said. I'm not against it, But that was the hardest thing that I struggled with, was just
Yeah,
like,
but why can't your exploration just be part of what's calling to your heart? Like I think we get so attached to like our life or what we do needing to have some sort of like value in terms of like maybe profitability or your career or whatever, and like why can't you just do what you do just to be doing it? Why can't you just be trying something out, just be trying something out, like,
mm-hmm,
and not worry about whether it's part of some, and you know what, who knows, maybe it will be part of some grander scheme to get you towards where you feel like you're meant to be, or where you are going to end up in the end.
mm-hmm.
um yeah. I know I've because I've listened to this podcast, I know you talk a lot about the shame and the frustration and sort of that time lost, too, and I think that was a big part of sort of researching the Tao for me, was because I was also in that same place of like being like, fuck, like I just wasted so much time. And I've come to sort of this idea, or like this realization, that part of that too is like when you know that you have greater potential, that's a good thing, right? If that knowing is not matching up or aligning in your external world because of whatever else is going on, um like that's okay, because it's something within you that's gonna be one more motivating factor for you to try and get yourself right.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's accessing that greater potential.
Yeah. And accessing it, and like Rome wasn't built in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Like we are so obsessed with like instant gratification, and it's just not a thing.
I
um
think we're actually like physically obsessed with instant gratification, because
yeah.
that's addiction, right? Like
Yeah, well, and the
that's,
dopamine, like
yeah.
all of that, it's so, and part of that too is like feeling, and I know that you said this earlier about coming to a yoga studio where you are feeling grounded, and so much of the reaching for something is escapism, right? And like this feeling of not being grounded in our bodies. And like, both my parents are alcoholics. Like it's, yes, it's genetic, but there's also a lot of things in my childhood, in my upbringing, that very much helped push me along that path of being in addiction and stuff like that. And it just, I actually just lost my train of thought.
It's okay. Just go with the flow. This is the
Right.
Tao of thinking.
Right, the Tao of thinking. Oh, but yeah. So it's not just genetic, it's also trauma, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like there's so many other things that contribute to it, that like just finding ways to feel more grounded within yourself really helps to stop reaching for something that, takes you out of your, whatever internal circumstances you're trying to escape, reaching for wine or beer, whiskey, whatever it is.
Well, and that goes along with, so y'all were saying like being able to access your potential or the true self, the true potential. But there's also a give and take where it's it's letting the potential. It's just allowing it. There's nothing to access. It's just finding presence so that that potential can emerge. I think even in spiritual communities, there's a lot of want to do more things to gain access to insight, potential, whatever we want to call it. But like you were saying about meditation, I mean, that's the practice of letting, right? And I don't, they feel so intertwined that you can't really have one without the other. But the potential knows what it wants. Like the potential knows what to do. Like you just said, like it's the tree. Just be a tree. And I've found it in my own spiritual practice of just, uh, I don't know, covering the tree because it just doesn't feel like it's doing what I wanted it to do. But that's not true spirituality. That's just, I don't know. That's like the opposite end of the spectrum of peacocking, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's still this kind of vanity or ego or something that's getting in the way of just letting the potential do its thing.
And it's still that need for control, right? And like the whole idea behind Taoism is finding control through letting go, right? Like as soon as you are able, and I say this all the time in yoga, trust in uncertainty, right? But like if you can really start to be okay with not knowing, because literally you're never going to know. You can have as many safety plans as you want in place. Like you're not going to be able to prepare for all things. Like when I'm on a plane and there's turbulence, I'm like, you know what, this is how I die. Like, what am I going to do about it? You know, this is how I go, you know? And like, my parents are probably the most cynical people on the planet. And honestly, it's exhausting. It is so exhausting. And it takes your energy, right? And so it's just like this matter of, you know, well, things are the way they are. They're going to be the way they're going to be. You know, the only thing that I can do is put my best foot forward and be a little softer in the way I try to live my life instead of forcing myself upon life, right? Let life live itself through me. I think some of that too, you know, I'm an artist and like sometimes I get really overwhelmed because I'm not quite sure what to make next, or I kind of fall into these, you know, these moments or these weeks where I'm trying to make things because I think it's what other people are going to like or whatever. And like, you know, there's like a quality of trying too hard in that, where then, you know, I feel like I'm not quite in that creative flow. And sometimes and recently I've been doing this a lot, where like when I feel overwhelmed, I'm like, hold on, I know how to be an artist. Like I literally have been doing it my whole life. And when I'm making art, it's not a matter of like really thinking about what comes next. It's just about doing and being, right? Like it's got its own energy and I'm just facilitating it, right? And so to learn how to extrapolate that into your day-to-day life and just be like, I'm here to facilitate, and I do my best facilitating when I'm present, when I take care of my, you know, body on a physical level, right? I'm stretching, I'm strong, like, you know, I'm eating right. Like these are things that help to facilitate that, but it's not so much like a doing or like a knowing from the head space. It's just like a feeling from the heart space.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the creative process. I tell this to new creatives at work all the time, that you know you have to fall in love with the actual process. Like it's, if you don't want to write, if you want just the product of what you've written and not the actual act of writing, like the product is actually secondary. It's the actual doing of writing and coming up with lines or like putting together things. Like that's the funnest, that's the best part, right? It's not getting lauded and applauded for everything that you've made. You can do it if you hide it away and no one sees it, you're still going to do it, you know? And that's, I think seeing Taoism through that sense really makes sense to me, because it is just about falling in love with the actual doing of it, you know? And I find that too with yoga. It's like there are no goals in yoga. There's no belts, there's no competitions, although that'd be funny. Like a yoga competition, but it's just like you go and you spend an hour just doing this thing, and then in the end of it you sometimes feel better, sometimes you feel like shit, sometimes, you know, it's either you make some sort of progress though. It's like, you know, it's never bad that you've done it. And that's just because it's, you know, the core thing to yoga to me is that it is really rooted or grounded, if you will, in the process of just doing yoga.
I think that was a really good point you made too, about like doing it even if no one sees it, or like, you know, you're doing it because you love doing it. And part of that too is our obsession with feeling like progress has to be like linear or positive in some way. Like if I fall on my ass, like that could be progress, right? Like I don't have to always frame that as not being progress, or as like, oh no, like I've taken 2 steps back or whatever. Like that's part of the process, because you're integrating the lessons, right? And that's why I try to remind myself, if lessons weren't hard, then they wouldn't be lessons, you know? Like you do come back around to things, and it just helps to sort of deepen it and integrate it a little more in your psyche, in the way of your being, than just sort of knowing about it or talking about it or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, in jujitsu and in comedy, falling on your ass is like the biggest part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to learn. It's about getting better at it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have a buddy, Max Fine, shout out Max, who, when I first met him, he said, I can't remember how many shows he did, but he went up for a month or 2 months straight, just bombing, to get used to the feeling, so
I don't know
that
if that
he
was intentional for Max Fine. I don't.
I feel
I'm.
like in hindsight, probably not, but the way I think that
It's a great
I
spin
took that
though,
as
where he was like, "Yo, I meant
yeah,
to do that." Yeah.
regardless of how he went to the stage before he bombed. I think that I got the message loud and clear, which is just being comfortable in it's not failing, being comfortable in the process. It's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
it's there. This is it is not supposed to look like anything. And what you made me think of was, especially in art, I think it was Alan Moore who talked about this, but like in everything he writes, he just dedicates it to some like word deity, or
Do
like
you know who
Thoth.
Alan Moore is?
Uh, he did. Don't tell me the Watchmen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's also a big magic practicer.
Yeah, I've seen
Yeah.
that little meme of him where it's like wizard and
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. When he's like on
mall
the news.
Santa.
Yeah.
yeah. But his was the first time I ever heard of the practice of just dedicating your art to the universe or to a deity, just as a I like it just because then there's no awards coming to me because I didn't do this. I just became the facilitator of what became the product, and that
Yes.
feels such a more special relationship than just you doing something.
Well, and I mean, if you think you're just doing something, then you're doing it rooted in ego, right? Like, and
Mm.
although the ego exists, that doesn't mean it's the ultimate truth. um, And I mean, like in the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about that, like doing something without attachment to the fruits of your labor, right? Doing it just because it's what needs to be done. Like that's just it. And yeah, if you're looking for the allocates, you're looking for the badges of honor, like then you are moving from your ego. And, I'm not sure if everybody watched the Anna Nicole Smith documentary or not. I didn't really know.
I didn't expect that to come up on this podcast.
I've been using it because I think I didn't, I didn't know much about her until I watched that. And I just think it was so interesting because she was so good at manifesting, but it all fell apart because she was manifesting from her ego, right? Like everything that she wanted, she was getting, but the space that she was manifesting from was like, yeah, from the space of ego. She wanted attention, she wanted money, like, and I'm not going to say that she's like a bad person, but like, it ended up not turning out so good for her. So it's kind of like that be careful what you wish for kind of thing. And again, if you are really attached to the outcomes, then again, you're not really going with the flow.
Right.
The,
And they talk
the
about this
Tao
in
of Anna
magic.
Nicole Smith.
Oh man.
I'd read that. It's like the
Oh
Tao of
man, I'd
Pooh,
read
but a
that.
little bit more scandalous.
Yeah, Tao of Pooh, Tao of Anna Nicole Smith. Um, that's why in magic it's so important to, when you go through the grades, you start with the elemental work before moving on to the planetary, but you want to purify the elements before moving on, because if you try to skip through all of the different um, degrees or spheres or whatever, then you do run the risk of doing things out of ego and trying to make changes in the world from that place. And you will make changes, but I mean, the Tao of Anna Nicole Smith, I think, shows us the result of manifesting too much from that place of closed off. And I don't know, it's not, it's the opposite of surrender.
Mm-hmm.
It's not being open.
Yeah.
No offense, Dan and Nicole Smith,
No,
but
you're
No,
good. I mean, I brought it up,
you
so
know
you're fine.
she made her uncle and I think a few other family members get like full back tattoos of her nude self.
They did not
no.
include that in the
They didn't put
documentary.
that.
I don't think
I think I
so.
watched a different documentary of Anna Nicole Smith, but I remember
Wow.
that
Yeah, are
She
you
made
they
them,
like interviewed her family. Yeah,
or they wanted to do it.
I think. Well, she maybe paid them. I think was something that happened. Yeah,
Wild.
see, that's big ego right there. That's
Mm-hmm.
peacock consciousness for sure.
that's
Yes.
the Tao of Anna Nicole.
There
Yeah.
you go. What not to do. Um, yeah, I think there was a thought right on the tip of
Sorry, I
my
didn't mean
tongue.
to interrupt everything with my Nicole
No, you're
fact.
good. You're good. Oh, um, I think when it comes to manifesting too, and again, being a human is just trying to reconcile a lot of opposites, right? Like you are the center of your own universe. Your perceptions, your subjective reality, like that is in some ways kind of all that matters to you. And that you can manifest, and change your reality in really profound ways when you start to get control of your headspace, your beliefs, and the way you interact with energy. Um, but then on the flip side, you do that too much. I feel like it kind of takes you into this like God complex of like, you know, then not allowing. And then when you don't allow, that's when I think the universe sometimes comes and really knocks you on your ass just to be like, hey, remember, right? Like there's
Yeah.
something else out there and you are co creating with it. You're not, manifesting up against it or whatever.
Right, and there was I was just talking to a priest about this, where he was saying, in almost on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you come into that nice relationship with the universe, where you're open and it feels like you're really in tune, but then you go off by yourself to just be in tune with the universe, kind of like going to the mountaintop and becoming that kind of hermit, where it's just you and God or you and the universe. Um, and he was saying like that's not good either. That like then you're not doing anything. You may feel like you're getting a lot of benefit from that, but the world isn't. So what difference does it make? There's a need to, almost like in the shamanic journey of like going and then coming back,
Mm-hmm.
or the heroic journey or whatever we want to call it.
Who said co-creating with the universe? You did?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Asia.
that yeah, I like that. It's like a collaboration. Like you have to
Mm-hmm.
put in your work and then, they put in this work as well.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like that idea of like grounding it down into, right, like finding the sacredness in the mundane, like not needing to be that's what Ram Dass talks about, right? Like, oh, I would go and I would be in India and I would be so enlightened and then I'd, go home and, see my family and my dad would say something like, so what are you doing for work? And I would just come crashing down, because you can't handle it. So it's like, and like to be fair, for some of those people who are, off in the mountains doing their meditation, their prayers and stuff on an energetic level, they're doing grid work for the world, and like that's great. But you're right. Like if you are removing yourself so much from society that you're no longer a part of it, then are you really, like integrated in your spiritual work? If, you're like, oh, I'm really spiritual, but like, don't touch me, like stay away from me. Like don't take me out of this space. Like you need to be on that mountaintop or in that cave within yourself while you're still moving through the world. And like, I've met some wonderful people who are also on more of a spiritual path who have been like, why are you living in Chicago, like, why aren't you over in North Carolina, or why aren't you like out west, or whatever. And it's like we need people all over the place, right? Like I don't feel like sometimes Chicago is the most conducive to like a nice spiritual path or lifestyle, and it can be a little hectic and loud and overwhelming. But at the same time, like if I can't be in my practice in this kind of a space, then what kind of practice is it really?
It's interesting
Right.
you brought up the the guys up on the integration aspect of it, because I
Mm-hmm.
think in regards to my own recovery, I spent the first year just locked away in my house. Like I couldn't leave. If I left, I felt that I was going to be triggered again. I wanted to do all these things, but I was like, but I could be triggered. And I've spoken to a lot of people about that who it's a pretty common,
Mm-hmm.
like you have to kind of become that, shaman on the mountain for a minute to get everything under control. And then I think even right now, I'm in like my reintegration efforts of like getting out there, trying to connect, trying to let the universe connect with me without it being in this like forceful way. But it's like even spiritual or even recovery, it seems like it's the same, very much the same journey.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you also need that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when your nervous system has been so out of alignment for so long, like just tunneling into yourself, like, self-isolating is not ideal and not great, but creating safe, sacred space and time alone for yourself is absolutely like so important.
Mm-hmm.
And like for the most part, if you've been again reaching for something for the last 15 years, like you haven't been giving that like yourself that kind of space. So, and it makes sense. And that's like, right when you start out, like that's the hardest.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
My
when you got to buckle
therapist,
down.
yeah, but on that note, my therapist, we were talking about monasticism, and he said,
Hmm.
those are the guys that are doing the spade work for everybody else. And I don't know, kind of relying on that, like you said, like there's a grid or there's a net that's being cast by these guys that are called to that vocation of going up to the mountain or going into monastery, whereas people like us, I guess, and or more in living in secular society, the monastery or the mountain is just inside yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really good to dig deep. And like Jody and I have talked about this, but especially coming out of drinking, it takes a long time to go down into the depths of yourself and then reemerge.
Well, we spent so much
um
time trying not to go down there. Like,
well, and you spend a lot of time in recovery refusing to,
yeah, I think
because
a
you
lot of
just don't
people
think
do.
that you
Yeah.
have to.
Yeah.
Like, I
There's
put
just
down
like,
the
oh, I'm done
bottle, why would
drinking.
I? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but and I think that's really cool that what you said, Jody, about like being in a place where you want to kind of integrate all of what you've been doing back into this kind of holistic sense, like being in community and having your practices and stuff. Like that's real spiritual work.
And I think a lot of that comes from identifying, though, the right community, which takes a whole nother monastic sort of and spiritual push to be like, oh, this doesn't serve me, but this does. And I think that's also like recognizing your potential and then finding what is speaking to you. And then,
Mm-hmm.
not relying on coping mechanisms to get you through it and just trying to see what you can, which means you have to sit in really uncomfortable situations. I mean, if we were having this podcast not even a year ago, my anxiety would be through the roof. And I'd probably be like a little high right now or something like that just to deal with it. But that would be a coping mechanism. And so through like a year of just being like putting myself in uncomfortable situations, I'm able to, sit and become more integrated.
Mm-hmm.
So it is like, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. It's like, sitting in downward dog for a super long time or fish pose for a really long time. Like you can
Mm-hmm.
feel all of your muscles getting sore, but in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel things stretching out and some things are popping, and then you're like, oh, that's a new pain, but it's like a good pain instead
Mm-hmm.
of just like the same old dull pain.
Yeah. I mean, it's really like, and I think, again, since there was no like really hard stop for me in terms of like the journey into sobriety and stuff like that, those dry January, I would start doing that after I did my first yoga teacher training. I was like, oh shit. And then, kind of fell out of it and stuff and whatever, but like started to do the dry January and then realizing like I didn't want to go out if I couldn't, like I was going to feel so uncomfortable if I couldn't drink. And then eventually over the years that dry January became dry January, February, March. And then eventually it was like, well, now I don't really even feel right because then I started to force myself to keep going out. And it's so weird because half the time it's like I'm around people that I've known for a long time, friends I've had for a long time or family members I've had for a long time. Like, why do I feel so anxious? That's something that's coming from within me. And then when you like start to ground yourself and ground your nervous system, like the somatic work is so important. Mm-hmm. Like you can't just sit there. And I think like, no shame on AA. Like I know it helps a lot of people, but that was one of the things that like, just, it wasn't working for me. It was so much talking about your problem. And then I just felt like I would go into it and be like, oh, I'm in like an okay place. And I come out of it like, damn, I'm so sad now. Yeah. Like I feel terrible. And like, there is something cathartic about like being around people who understand and who have similar experiences and, can relate. And then, but like, that's what I go on Reddit for. Yeah. And when I'm ready for that, that's what I go on Reddit for. But like otherwise, if I'm just talking about it, right, it's not, I don't feel like I'm solving anything. And I keep talking about Ram Dass because I love Ram Dass. But like, at one point he's like, you meet someone, they try to or they have quit cigarettes and they're like, yeah, I haven't smoked in like 637 days. And you think, wow, this person's like going to die of not smoking, because they're like so focused on it. And that's sometimes how I feel. Like you're just so focused on the pushing away that you don't like come back into yourself and see like, well, what can I fill this space with? Like, how do I ground so that I don't feel like I'm constantly just like at ends or at odds with reality or what's happening around me.
Yeah, so you're not just counting days. Yeah.
Yeah, because because it goes back to what you were saying about like checking yoga off from the to-do list today or meditation. Like I did it, now I get a gold star, I get a check mark, and now I can go and do the next thing. But that's not how those practices are going to be integrated. They're not going to, I don't know if you're going to get the same benefit from them if you're just doing them so that you can say that you did them. Mm-hmm. And like, I was thinking to myself a couple years ago when I was looking at like my counter of my days sober, I was just going, this like feels more like days without incident in a warehouse.
Yeah.
This is going to go to zero at some
point.
No
accidents. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I just feel like I'm counting up to start again. Instead of letting the days just be the days. And yeah, they're going to be hard, but at least I'm not. It's kind of like what you said, and it's really hard not to do this, but for some people, for me, and where you can substitute your thinking for I'm not going to drink for I'm going to do this. Mm-hmm. Today I'm not going to drink is not the best quality of thought, whereas it could be today I'm going to meditate and then I'm going to eat a salad or something.
Or even finding something where you're not saying, oh, today I'm not going to drink, but you're like, oh, today I'm not going to drink because I get to do yoga and mm-hmm. I can't do that if I drink. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to drink because I get to meditate. And I guess you could meditate drunk, but it doesn't sound very fun.
No, it doesn't seem like it would have the same effect.
I don't think I could keep myself upright.
Yeah. Well, that's what I realized though, and I still smoke way too much weed. So that's the thing we're working on now. But what I realize when I come in and out of that is if I haven't been meditating, then I'm reaching for, weed so much mm-hmm. more. And just the process of like, and so there is something to be said for like discipline, right? Like just showing up to do it. Like the point shouldn't be to check it off your list, but if like, checking off the list like helps you show up for it, great, whatever. Like sometimes it's like, oh wow, look at my progress. I've like filled out all these boxes. I've meditated so many days. Great. But then, that becomes kind of secondary the more and more you do it. So just like having the discipline to show up, then, and that's the thing with these practices. It's like, I forget who was talking about it. It was definitely an interview with Ram Dass, but it was someone else that was saying this. And they were saying about like how these practices is just
Should we just get Ram Dass?
Yeah, let's just like channel him in from the cosmos.
Robert Downey Jr. too. Can we just get them on the podcast?
I mean, he's got a permanent spot on my website, so hopefully someday he'll see that and be like, oh my god, cool. And we'll be friends and we'll have a sustainable,
like, I remember her. She scared me that one time.
Right. She was crying in my face and I gave her a hug. Yeah, but like, what were we talking about?
Sorry.
You're good. An
interview with someone said something.
So like these practices, right? These practices, I should have taken more Adderall, to be honest. These practices are like, you have a shirt and it's got dirt on it, but then you put it in water and you rub it with soap, which is like different dirt, and you just rub it and rub it and rub it, and then you pull it out and then it's clean, right? And it's like you got to kind of trust the process, trust the practice. Like you do the practice and then eventually you're like, holy shit, like I'm an entirely different person. Like I didn't mean to be a different person, but like, it feels good. And I think that once you start noticing that, it keeps you coming back.
Yes. The reward of doing these practices, eventually you see that it's the practice itself is so rewarding.
Well said.
Thank you. But that was the thing that I noticed about like meditation prayer was checking the boxes and going, hell yeah, I'm like sticking with something. This discipline's great, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, it was kind of like, what you dang, yo.
Dexter.
Also, Dexter is on the podcast. We forgot to introduce Dexter.
Yes, Dexter is my roommate's dog. He's very cute.
Probably the most
very angry right
enlightened
now.
one here. We're just having a little dog break.
You can edit that out, right?
Good. This is the time to breathe.
I don't think I'm going to edit it out. I think, honestly, we might get more listeners if we keep the dog in it.
I mean, I'm a big fan of dogs, so... Look are these the things you have to... Dexter, what do you think about the Dao?
Oh.
I calmed him down.
Good job.
Took some breaths. Centered himself.
There we go. Oh, Jody, you have a new friend.
What's the I guess to relate it back to the Tao, the idea of it's not you doing something. The act is fully you and fully the thing, and there's no difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the equivalent of like, just being in the zone. And this is what like I kind of try to, when I'm trying to like get my friends to go do yoga or something, right? I'll sort of try and explain to them, like if you are a basketball player, right, you're going to go to practice every day. But then when the game comes, like you're not thinking, you're just doing, right? You're on, and there's this synergy between you and your teammates, and it's what makes the game flow. And it's the same, like, with musicians that like play music together and then they start just riffing off each other, like there's this inherent energy that's just alive and all around us that becomes a lot more present and like palpable when we turn down, our resistance to it because we have expectations on what reality should look like, and we're able to just let it be, let it flow. Yeah, I mean, again, like you look outside, you look at nature, like nature knows what to do. Like like the trees know when to lose their leaves. They know when to send out new buds. Squirrels know, where to hide their food and what, like everything knows what to do. And for some reason we feel like we don't know. And part of that is like the society that we've constructed for ourselves has been a society that has been built on ego, our collective ego, right? What rules, right? If you can champion against nature. You're trying to take from the earth. You're committing genocide. You're enslaving people. You're doing all these things, trying to get for you. That's all ego, right? Because you think that the universe is inherently hostile and that you are up against it. And so you have to take whatever you can. And that's just not how it is. And so when you start to soften and you're like, wow, I don't need to be moving from a place of fear, right? Because that's what we want when we're trying to like control things, because we're afraid of what's going to happen if we don't, right? If we don't have a plan, or if we don't, I mean, obviously everyone, would like to have savings, but you know what I mean, right? Like if there's not a safety net there, we freak out because we forgot that there is an inherent safety net in the universe, because the universe is just an extension of you, right? Like you are channeling divine conscious awareness, where if you were to move up the planes of reality, all of that conscious awareness is unified, like all in one realm. And it just gets like filtered down, and it's filtered through these different incarnations. And so when you start to look at the world, and when I have a lot of social anxiety, and so I try to remind myself, and this has really helped a lot, is like, just look at everyone and be like, wow, everyone's my friend. Like, what if you just walk down the street like that? Like, you would feel so different, like, and obviously you should, be wary, because there are some people who want to take advantage and things like that, like be smart about things. But generally, when you extend that like loving energy out, that's what you get in return.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've been practicing. My therapist asked me to consider how I enter a room.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to enter a room with my headphones on. Like I'd roll into jujitsu with my headphones on. I wouldn't look at anybody. I would keep them on while I was getting dressed. And now I take them off. I go in. I try to make like eye contact with everyone. I say hey. And there was like so much that I was missing out because I just wasn't aware. I wasn't like entering the room
And you
with
weren't
that
present.
energy. Yeah. And I found that like because I've been doing that, it's allowing others to become more present as well. And then so now the gym is becoming more connected. It's becoming more of a community because we're not in this like isolated realm anymore.
And you're allowing people also to be more authentic. Like when you can be vulnerable, when you're authentic, other people are authentic. So then the mask of like the ego falls down. And, like when I say at the end of yoga practice, which is also a Ram Dass thing, maybe this episode should be called Ram Dass and the Dao.
At ramdass.com.
But, when we say namaste, that light within me, that pure conscious divine awareness within me honors the same light, the same consciousness within you. And we recognize that when you are grounded in that space in you, right? You've integrated it. You're grounded in that space in you. I'm grounded in that space in me. There is only one of us, right? And that's what it is. It's like we're all an extension of the same thing. And the more that you can like honor that, like the less scary the world becomes, the less like, exhausting the world becomes, because everyone's like, there's something else out there that's helping you. Everyone wants to be your friend. It's just nicer. It's just a nicer way of being.
Mm-hmm. It's like everyone else is we're all living in the same world too. So we're all struggling with a lot of the same things. So if you enter it with that authenticity, it allows them to put down their guards as well.
Right. And if you enter, yeah, when you enter with, frustration or anger, right? Like you can also feel how that changes an environment or a situation, So it's like, if you can be the one that's showing up with a smile, like you never know how that's going to change someone's day, and then they're going to pass on to someone else. I mean, this is all basic Mr. Rogers stuff.
Yeah. Pay it forward. Yeah.
It was Saint Seraphim of Sarab said that if you find peace...
Anna Nicole Smith, Ram Dass, and Saint Seraphim of Sarab.
Saint Seraphim of Sarab said, if you find peace, you will save 1,000. So if you ground into yourself and become that kind of vessel of peace, it's scientific too. If you just make your central nervous system calm, you will calm a room. And it's if we just continue that practice of calming ourselves, it's infectious. Um, and I was thinking, like, the what you were talking about, the world that we live in it's so almost necessary to be inundated with substances of any kind, clinging to something just because it feels like we have to be neurotic to live in a world like this.
We've also been
Um,
sold all of these things.
it's-
Right. Like
yeah,
how many times, like
yeah,
when I was in college, I was like, oh, there's Don Draper with his like whiskey and like, oh, I'm having a bad day. I'm going to need a drink, like it's just cool. It's not
yeah,
cool. It doesn't make you feel better.
right.
It doesn't accomplish anything, but it does keep you, if you're sort of subscribed to this, in a state of lower vibration, so that, people who are exhausted are more likely to, be concerned with themselves. They're not going to go out and, educate themselves on who to vote for. They're not going to like try and start, community projects. They're not going to, right? Like we know that companies will literally spend a ton more money to lobby against universal healthcare so that they can use it as power, as leverage over people to get them to work for them, because they can provide them with healthcare, even though all of that is more expensive in the long run. Like there is an effort to, always to exploit the masses. And that again all stems from like the collective ego, because that's what's running the show right now.
Yeah, and it's like I remember when I was trying to quit smoking, I read this book. I think it's called How to Quit Smoking, and the first thing that it
Good
said,
title.
yeah, it was right on point. And the first thing it said was like people who die from cigarettes are death by marketing, because we were convinced that it would relax us, when it actually, like, physically it does the exact opposite. We got to keep hustling, we got to go get drunk to go have fun, or 3 lunch martinis or 3 martini lunches, things like that.
And what does that all tie back to? This yang energy, right? And when we're living in alignment with the Tao, we're in our yin energy. So it's being grounded in the yin, being grounded in the feminine, being grounded in that more passive energy, and then just exerting force or energy, in a yang sort of way when you need it, right? Instead of always existing in the yang, always having your nervous system highly activated, go, 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 got to get it all done. And then sometimes, okay, now I'm going to like veg out and watch TV, which arguably is also not always very relaxing, depending on what you're watching. You're watching some crime murder show or something,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
that's not great for your nervous system either, right? So it's like we've just lost touch. And I think it kind of falls in line with like this patriarchy and like, this idea that like we have to honor the productivity at the expense of, the rest and relax and restore. But really you are, they look at the 4-day work weeks, right? You're more productive when you do less.
Mm-hmm.
We just are not built to be going 100 miles an hour all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's interesting to think of the patriarchy in spiritual terms too, because when you're denying the divine feminine within all of us, you're severing the connection between you and your intuition and that potential, that if you're just constantly thinking about production, there is no access or letting or anything. There's no grounding in that. It's always looking outside yourself, but nothing to back it up. It's this hollow. It's like a hollow shell of self. And so, like, whatever you create from that place is inherently valueless, but not in like what we've been talking about. It's not backed up by that yin potential tapping into what is all around us, what is connecting me with you. It's just trying to claw for something. It's trying to get instead of give.
Yeah, it's that endless growth. And like, for the sake of what? Like, oh, profit margins have to be up every single quarter. Well, like, how does that even work? Like nothing is like that. It's not sustainable. Yeah. And nature isn't like that, right? Like the Tao is about coming back into harmony with nature and to understanding ourselves as a part of nature. And so, you look at the society we've created and like all of that, like AI and like, there's great things with technology and things like that. I'm not going to pretend like there's not, but so much of that, like if you're only looking towards that and you're looking towards AI and you're looking towards all these things, and then you look outside and like, well, we've depleted all the soil and like now there's no, that nothing's growing and we've got these, horrible natural disasters and blah. It's like, okay, so what the fuck is the point of the AI now? Like if we can't even just survive on this earth, like.
Tom,
I
you're
wonder,
thinking. I can see the machinations.
Jody. Well,
Something.
I don't want to like keep stepping in if you have a thought, but
I
it's
rarely have a thought. I'm in perfect
well,
harmony
no,
over
you're in
here.
perfect. You're just present. You're being
Yeah,
present.
very
I
within
appreciate
my feminine energies.
it. But I think that there's it's almost, I was talking to somebody about this recently where that need to go into the monastery that is your heart, or go to the mountain, or like find your center, find that feminine, um that feminine aspect of yourself, in order to give, in order to be um a co-creator, a co-human being with everybody. It sometimes it feels like to want to do that is met with a lot of pushback from people, where it someone might offer that this is like a selfish way of being, to like go inside yourself and try to tune in, because it is seeking solitude, because that's where you can listen to yourself. But in a culture that demands, then there's no time set apart for that kind of introspective time. um and like thinking about uh like quote unquote Eastern cultures, where they have space set out for people to seek nirvana. Like, we don't have that in the quote unquote West, right? There's only, here, you better get money and then give it back to me.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
um and so there but there's just no, like, we there's no great work to attend to in a society like that. There's only the one thing that we need from you, and that's just get more.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's even. I'm finding. I have found that that's even in like a beyond like a societal, even on an individual interaction level. Like I find that maybe at work and some of the people I interact with, they expect a performance. I mean, maybe Tom, you probably get this when people find out you're a stand-up comedian. They're like, "Tell me a joke," but even then, like they kind of expect you to be a little bit funny all the
Happened
time.
last night. I was at a party, and it came up, and I had to explain, no, I don't do that
I'm
anymore.
not that
And
kind of
also,
comedian. I wasn't the
I'm
funny
not that kind of
kind.
comedian. I can't explain to you what stand up is, even, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a need for you to do
What do
something.
you got for me? Yeah, it's kind of
Right.
this like, oh, what are you going to perform? It's just this performative aspect. And like, even with my recovery, like so much of my drinking was rooted in this like need to perform, this like
Mm-hmm.
need to like make other people laugh, make other people feel better. It's the ultimate people pleaser. I'm going to get drunk. I'm going to be the drunkest so that you don't have to, kind of thing, like. And then when I got sober, it was like, oh, but who am I? Like, what is this? What's this like authentic thing? And how do I not perform? How do I interact with people without being performative? And it's still like a struggle where you're just like, okay, well, how do I like give off my most authentic self in these different situations, like during a job interview or during like, like a date or something like that, when you can tell that on the other end, they're like looking for that performance, that like Western mindset of just like, give me, tell me your best joke in like the next 5 minutes so that I can be impressed with you. Keep impressing me and I'll like you.
Well, they're expecting you to live from your ego,
Yeah,
right?
right.
They want
Yeah.
your ego to reflect their ego, and then you guys can, like, be cool and funny together, but you're not actually speaking from like the heart place. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I feel that. And Tom, to your point about, not having time for rest too, there's this idea of like rest being revolution, right? Rest as resistance. Um, if you don't play the game, then like,
What does that
what's this
say?
thing?
Sabbath as resistance?
Nice.
Tom held up a sign that said Sabbath as resistance, everybody. Tom always forgets that this is an audio based
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
format.
no, I'm reading a book that's called Sabbath as Resistance right now. Um, uh, I don't want to cut you off or anything, but I please continue. It's really really important.
Yes, I mean it's the same thing, right? Like, and part of that is reclaiming yourself from sort of like the market we've been born into, right? Like you need a job so that you can literally just live, so that you can, well, not in America, you can't afford healthcare, but like you need a job so that you can put food on the table and a roof over your head and all this stuff. And it's like food grows from the earth, right? Like we could live in communities. Like we don't have to be subscribing to this. And when you start to take time for yourself, and that's the other thing is like, again, we all have something within us that wants to be brought to the table. And, your time is so valuable. And, if you ignore yourself and you ignore cultivating that within yourself so that you can, do what you're told to do and go out and go make money and like blah, blah, again, not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, there are plenty of people who are accountants and I'm sure really love it and are really good at it. And that's great because I don't want to, I don't like accounting. So don't make me do it. But just as a way to like remember yourself as a part of something greater than just the society that we've built, that values things that are quite material and really unimportant in the long run, right? Like I've said this in yoga class too. I don't know what the point of life is, but I'm pretty sure the point of life is not to become the CEO of like whatever company, like the point, in the grand scheme of things is like to be evolving the collective consciousness. And so when you go through hardships or when you look at the world around you, like, damn, like the world sucks and it's so hard. And yes, but like also remember the world that you're looking at has been born of the past. And, even though it's not great now, we are a little less rooted in our ego than we have been, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, whatever, right? Like things are getting better. They're not great. And also, systems in power can like kind of change and shape shift a little bit to kind of give you the illusion that things are getting better when really like, power's not quite changing hands. But it's really important that if you just remind yourself that you're a part of something greater and that there's something else for you to like do and like explore and that you don't have to even again right know what that is. You just give yourself time to be soft and to like kind of cut out some of the bullshit. You will naturally, it's not so much like a pushing away of society as it is again like a falling in love with something else. And then you bring that to the table and then people around you get inspired and want to like figure out how to do that for themselves because we're all honestly, I feel like everybody's just really kind of starved for this sort of spiritual essence that is all around us. It's just it's not integrated in Western society or valued.
I think people are starved for softness.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for
all
sure.
around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, you don't even really see it on TV. I mean, like, that's why everyone thinks about Mr. Rogers, like you mentioned earlier, or like Bob Ross. They brought this kind of softness.
And also softness, like in that masculine energy, right? Mm-hmm. Like this rise of the divine feminine doesn't have to be a rejection of the masculine. It's an integration of like, how can you be both, right? Because you do need both. It's just that for so long we've been pushing away the divine feminine that now it feels like, the pendulum's just swinging over to the other side. But it doesn't mean that we're rejecting, the masculine energy. Again, you need that little bit of yang. You got to get things done. But just not to be moving so much from like the space of like, oh my God, what will happen if I don't? Right? Like just chill. Mm-hmm. Let yourself be carried by something else instead of feeling like you always have to do the carrying.
Yeah, and it would be the same consciousness to just let the pendulum swing to the other side and only focus on the divine feminine, where we need the two to be united in order to move forward. Like that's the being so engrossed in in a divine masculine society, or just a masculine society. It's still the same. Like there's still the same stagnation that would exist if we just let the pendulum swing the other way. There needs to be this union of opposites
Mm-hmm.
in all of what we do, right? Um,
If only there
and
was
that
like a
goes
symbol that would like represent that,
right,
like some sort
right,
of balanced symbol, like two fish going around each other or something like that. I don't know. I'm just off the top of my head. I don't know.
Maybe we could come
right.
up with something.
Like Libra scales, maybe, or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
I think you being in marketing, I think that this is
Oh,
good.
you mean a logo?
Um,
Yeah, I think we could think
yeah,
of a
you
logo
should
and
make
like
a
a.
logo.
Maybe
Is
like
what
a
you should.
circle. I think it should
I like
include a
that.
circle.
Maybe something in the circle,
Yeah,
like an S
and
shape.
like things that are opposites, like black and white or something.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's cool.
this is
That's
yeah,
cool. I
good
think that's
Actually,
concept art.
I think in my research for this episode, because I was really nervous, but I learned about the symbol for the Tao, which includes yin and yang, and then the person, and then I think the symbol for like conscious energy or something.
There's different symbols.
Well, I mean, in like the characters like in Chinese,
Oh,
because like
okay.
you put different characters together and then it means a whole word, but you can like kind of break down what those characters are within that big character and be like, oh, this is this
Oh yeah,
character.
yeah. And they're like
Mm-hmm.
built on each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Tom, do you have your water bottle with you?
I do.
Can you? I see the. I read about there's some
The I Ching.
significance with the
Yeah,
lines
the
around.
hexagrams. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
the
that's why it's on
boa.
the Korean flag. It's like there it has something to do with Taoism. I don't remember any of it, so I have nothing
Well,
else to contribute. But
it's heaven and earth that are on that. That's earth. That's heaven. And then y'all can't see the.
the top is
I'm putting
Earth
down
or
the
the.
water bottle. But yeah, the yeah, it goes with the I Ching, right? So I don't know, Asia, if you've had experience with
I used to use it in college as like a divination thing because I didn't
yeah.
really understand it. I still don't quite understand it outside of divination because I'm like, oh, I'll just like roll the dice and see what page it, gives me. And then I'll open to that page and then it'll say something profound. And I'm like, wow, this really applies to my life.
You
Um,
did divination as well.
I mean, I read tarot and stuff.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, yeah. That's how I think I really started to open up to the idea, right, that the universe is conversing with me. Also, candle gazing,
What's
but
candle
it's
gazing? I've never heard of that.
or like flame, like fire meditation, where I would just gaze at a candle for like an hour,
Oh,
and the goal is to kind of like use that as a point of focus to clear your mind. But what you kind of notice is that, at least for me, maybe I'm just insane, but like the candle had its own voice. And
yeah.
so I would notice when it was like me thinking something versus like kind of like a download or a channel that I was getting from the candle. And now I talk to my candles all the time. And I feel like the universe is animated all around me in a way that like makes it easier for me. I mean, you slip in and out of it, right? But like to stay grounded in this idea of, wu wei, of like being in alignment with something greater than yourself, because you feel the wind and you see the leaves rustle on the trees, or you get in your car, you turn on the radio and it's like your favorite song, or like you're on the train and you're thinking about something and then you hear a conversation from somebody and you're like, wow, that was really actually applicable to like what I'm thinking about or what I'm going through in my life. And it's like when you start to open yourself up to the entire universe being a living organism around you that's communicating to you and through you, then, first of all, it's hard to feel alone. And second of all, like it also becomes harder to live selfishly because everyone is just an extension of you, right? Like, so, yeah, I think that was a really big part of, again, and also sobriety is just like, wow, I can't be cutting myself off from all of this because there's something else that's out there that's so much greater than myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's I think that's why magic personally for me it was so informative, was just being able to um just let yourself be enchanted by
Yes.
the world.
Yes, we
Um,
forget
yeah,
about the power of awe, and
Hmm.
like
right.
wonder. There's
Yeah.
there was a article that I read for my art history class, and there is a quote in there, and it was from John Berger, the Ways of Seeing, and it said something about like, you could describe a sunset, and all the scientific things that are happening. You could just describe a sunset as it looks, but it will never compare to the experience of seeing it. Right. And like we are so reductionist in like attaching to the scientific method, blah, blah, that we have divorced ourselves from the magic, the awe, the beauty of things, which is just as much an integral and valid part of life as, here are all the muscles that make up, the human body or whatever it is, right? Like I could describe to you what a human is scientifically, but it wouldn't quite capture what it means to be human.
I think that brings back kind of what you were saying about falling in love with sobriety as opposed to having a hard stop. It's like I'm sober because I have to so I'm able to do this so that
Mm-hmm.
I can see that
Or
so that I
just,
can
and it
like
just
accept
feels
this.
better.
Yeah. I'm not locking myself away. I'm not like disconnecting myself. I'm like in this awe and I can immerse myself in the awe of the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I couldn't find it. I was trying to find a quote that you made me think of, whereas it was this theologian who was just he was saying, the problem with the church right now is that there's no poets at the pulpit
Mm-hmm.
because there's that's the only way we can really describe the awe and grandeur of these universal truths that are transcending words. And I don't know, life is very beautiful, but it's almost like an impediment to try to describe it. You just have to kind of be present for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And so many people would rather not be present for it.
It's easier.
It is. Sometimes I'm like, damn, I miss the days when it was enough for me just to like do my stuff and watch my TV. And I was like, this is fine. And now I'm like, oh, I feel like I want a little bit more. And a lot of that comes down to connection, right? Like the reason why I feel like I found the universe in the first place, I mean, I feel like it found me, was just I was so lonely and I was so depressed. And like when you're in that space and you don't feel like there's opportunity for connection outside of, what you're going through, um, having something else there that is like deep within you, be like, hello. You're like, oh shit. And then again, right? You're never alone.
You made Dexter bark because of that knock.
I did. Yep. He likes to bark. If I rustle something, he barks. If he sees a light, like a flashlight, he'll bark. Yeah, he likes to pretend like he's a tough little man, but he's really just 10 pounds of pure love.
It is interesting that loneliness is the catalyst. Like when you're looking for the thing all around you, you start realizing that it's all around you.
You're like, oh, I've been looking at it my whole life, but not seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and you have so many things that are obscuring your view. Like in the Eightfold Path, right view is the first step, right, of the path itself, where you're taking all this stuff out of your perception and all of these like passionate ways of seeing the world that are obscuring the reality of what is. And you don't go anywhere to become enlightened. You just become enlightened.
You just go within.
Um, you go, yeah, you go within, right? Yeah, and I there's to go back to my what I was saying before. Just there's a real struggle with we've talked about this, Jody, where it's you don't want to confront the present. You don't want to go within.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You want someone to say, read this recipe, put this on, and bow 3 times, and then you're good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, why
Um,
would you want to as a drinker, right? It's like you spend so much of your time developing this muscle memory of disconnecting. And then you're like, okay, so now I got to do this thing I've been avoiding for however many, and it's very uncomfortable. But yeah, and you want a cocktail for it. You want like
A reward.
yeah, yeah, like
Yes,
two
yeah.
parts vodka, one part enlightenment. Shake it, put it over ice. But it doesn't work that way.
Because then it's not integrated.
Yeah, you have to denature the alcohol first. That's how
So
you make
then,
vodka. Anyways, keep
oh,
going.
but no, I didn't even make that connection with what you just said. Like, yeah, there is, when you want to do spiritual work, especially coming from a drinking lifestyle, I just want to be able to order it. Can I just order all of the rewards of what I need to
Hmm.
do? Um, is there a pill that I can take? And someone might say yes, there is, but there's a lot of different stuff that you could do that is not pill related.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but of course, like for me anyway, like taking not pills, but drinking to be pills wasn't my huge. We all I think we all have our pills phase. I'm not going to keep talking about this. But the drinking at first, because I went back through my like artist way pages back to when I was like 20 or something, and I was going, man, it would be really cool to try yoga, wouldn't it be? And the like little by little, you just watch your handwriting get more and more hungover and not being into yoga.
Hmm.
But there's a part of you that wants to do those practices. There's that part of you that knows that that's going to help facilitate the emergence of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And but it is so much easier just to go, well, I'm screw that. That sounds like I have to start doing something and I have to be uncomfortable and I can just put down $6 and get a shot. Um,
Especially when you're like, Taoism's about not doing stuff, and that's exactly what I'm doing right
I'm doing
now.
it so
Yeah,
good.
I'm sitting on the porch, I'm drinking. That's Tao.
yeah. Why, yeah, why would I candle gaze if I could just chain smoke all night?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. I'm staring at my cigarette. Does that count? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you miss out on all the presents. It's what it's all about, right? Being present if it's uncomfortable, being present if it's hard, being present when it's beautiful.
It takes a discipline. I think that's what you're getting at, right, Tom? Because even the discipline of morning pages, which The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron,
So
right?
hard.
It's
Yeah.
very hard, especially when you're hungover. There are so many morning pages I've started for like a week, and then I'm like, I don't want to wake up that early. Um, and it's just it's difficult. But there is like I remember even when I was drinking, this constant want to be present, and even like interacting with people who I felt were more present than I, and having this tinge of jealousy of what they have. And then what was lacking though was the discipline, the slow growth, the acceptance of that slow growth. Because it's so much easier to just go to the bar, order it up,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll find that same kind of enlightenment 4 drinks in, and then lose it
Well,
on
I
my
mean,
fifth drink. Yeah.
It's like it's a different enlightenment.
I'm
I
not
was
sure if it's
convinced
quite
it
the
was very
same.
much the same, but yeah, it's like, and then that just becomes, what we do. That's how you relax. That's how you get out
You
that yang energy.
disassociate.
Yeah, by
Yes, you
disassociating.
just exactly. That's the word for it, right? But when you disassociate, and um, you don't have any experience with being present. There's a feeling where you go, well, this is something's going on. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not like maybe I'm not in my body, but maybe that's what it is. Um,
It was super fun.
and yeah,
It's super fun.
yeah. I mean, for years I was disassociating and I thought that drinking was putting me back into my body, but really what it was doing was just making me comfortable disassociating.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but it's just you can fool yourself for so long, um, assuming I don't know, thinking that you're doing something that is helping you be a human being, but it's just taking you away from yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's, I mean, when everybody's fucking drinking, it's like it's just so normalized, which is wild to me because it's incredibly toxic and poisonous and horrible. Although I will say the other half of my journey into sobriety and falling in love with sobriety has definitely been psychedelics and ayahuasca. So poison your body a little bit. Choose the right poison.
Yeah, I mean that's poison for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a lot of like spiritual rituals that involve like doing a kegger or anything like
No,
that.
no, I
Although
It
do
is a
think
ritual.
that
It is a ritual,
alcohol,
though.
to do a yeah, it is a ritual.
it's a different kind of
Doing
ritual.
shot for shot, yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
a ritual.
I do think that alcohol helps like move anger out of your body, um, but not excessively. Like having because there are a lot of traditions that have their own version of like sort of like sacred alcohol or like wine or whatever, but just not tons and tons and tons of it every single day.
Yeah, like communion.
Yes.
Yeah, communion. I mean, it's not wine if we believe what they,
It's
that
blood.
belief, but yeah, it's blood. Yeah.
Mm.
It's
But
2,000 year old blood.
it's
Mm.
it's
Or grape
it's
juice if you're Methodist, like I was raised.
right. Well, it's sacramental in I don't know, it's still communion, like not just the Eucharist itself, but it's becoming one with the people around you, and it's an external expression of your union with your community.
Mm-hmm.
You're eating of the same bread, which is the body. You're drinking of the same blood. You're becoming one with each other, and I mean, it's just so different than being at the bar and enfolding by drinking. You're just going in. No matter how many like great conversations you have at the bar that you don't remember, that's not community. I mean, it feels like it, but it's like this community that's built around you closing yourself off
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like a
from
community of
vulnerability.
sickness. Yeah, or
Mm-hmm.
in sickness,
Right.
rather. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
all super fragile, like if then what happens when you're not at the bar? Is that community still there?
That was
No,
a good lesson. That's a good lesson when you get sober, is that you lose a lot of people.
that was like
Mm-hmm.
the first lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
You're
It's
dr-
like the immediate lesson.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, your drinking
Uh,
buddies are the first to go.
it makes sobriety the first you know 48 hours, like the biblical 48 hours, like however long that is. It makes it really difficult to stay wanting to be sober because you lose your community in one night.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But
but then it
then
get like, and then what? Yeah,
and then you're forced to take some time alone, and then you're like, oh wait, I'm not alone, and then
yeah,
the process continues.
Because you
exactly.
start looking around. You start opening yourself up to new opportunities, to different kinds of people.
And when
To
you're bringing the universe with you everywhere you go, like my roommate was like, I don't understand, like how you can do mushrooms and go to a Pearl Jam concert by yourself. I'm like, because I'm never by myself, like I always have the universe with me. And that is like the greatest comfort. And that is like, whatever happens, happens. Like I'm gonna get through it. Or if I don't, like then I'm not, like, okay. I'm just, you just stop feeling alone. And like that's the biggest part, I think, is, trying to constantly escape from that feeling.
and you're definitely not the only person on mushrooms at that Pearl Jam concert.
No. But, yeah.
And you'll find each other. That's the thing about mushrooms is you always find the other person on
Hmm.
mushrooms.
And you can always
Oh
tell
yeah.
because
Well,
they're just happy and their eyes are like, hello.
the spores are communicating with one another.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think it goes hand in hand with like yoga and the Tao and sobriety and especially recovery. But there's this stepping into trust, like that's what
Hmm.
you're describing, and it's really hard to hold the line of trust. But the more you give into it, the more easy it becomes to
Hmm.
just remain there, you know?
And you always have to remind yourself, if you're feeling anxious, then you are not trusting. That is something I always remind myself. And like, there's nothing wrong with feeling anxious or having an activated nervous system. Like, we've all been there, we all have it to some degree, but just to try and, bring you back is like, okay, wait, I notice that I'm, anxious about this, and that means that I'm afraid of, the potential outcomes. And you're not trusting. When you're trusting, your nervous system is calm. And that's why sometimes you got to do it the reverse, right? Instead of trying to get yourself to trust, calm your nervous system first, and then it's easier to trust. So like doing the somatic work,
Yeah, putting yourself in that uncomfortable situation, knowing that you'll be fine in the end.
Yeah, will you go into the somatic aspect of the practice? Like it can be with yoga, it could be, just other ways of approaching it too.
Yeah. Well, first of all, your body is like a reflection of your internal state, right? Like I've got The Body Keeps the Score right there. Actually, I haven't read it
That's
yet.
good. You should read it.
I know it's right there. I've had it for like a year. But that
we also have a fire going, so we're doing a little candle.
Yeah, we're doing a TV fire. It's pretty
TV candle meditation.
But your body, and that's what I started to notice within myself, is like, as I was because I had a lot of chronic pain in my body, and as I like really went, full throttle to try and work that pain out of my body, I started realizing like the way that I would stand, around people would feel like I would feel so much more grounded, like in my feet or in my belly. Like, and a lot of that, when your nervous system is activated all the time, you actually get used to those chemicals being released, and like you feel like that's your baseline. And so then when you force yourself into these situations where, you're stretching out, the parts of your body that are super, super tight, and you're like, oh my God, I am physically releasing all this. But now I feel like, Jody, you're always like, oh, I'm always like pigeon pose, like, and we store a lot in our hips, right? We're physically releasing, but in the process of physically releasing, there's all this emotional stuff that comes up for us. And like, you're kind of like peeling back the layers and giving yourself opportunity to shed all these things so that you can keep being reborn again, perhaps feeling, a little more settled, and also a little more aware of what your body is telling you, right? Like your body, when you start to really, pay attention to the way your body feels in certain situations, you can tell when you're tensing, when you're holding, when you're setting your jaw, when you're like, resisting what somebody's saying or whatever it is, like, and then you physically start to soften, you change the energy within yourself, which just makes it, I think, a lot easier to, ground back down or whatever it is. Because if you just try and talk to, like, from the headspace, talk yourself out of your anxiety, I mean, maybe you could do it, but like what I have found is that's not the case. So yeah, all of that somatic work, restorative yoga, breath work, massage, acupuncture, like your body. Oh, I love this. Jody, I feel so bad because I feel like you've heard all of this in my yoga classes, but that's okay.
Yeah, but this time we're recording it.
Yeah, so now it's forever, so everyone can hear it. Right, but like if you were to scale up an atom to the size of a football field, the nucleus would be like a grain of salt at the center of the field.
I've heard this one before.
Oh, no. Oh, sucks.
Give me some new content.
Right? So like you are mostly space. And we are energy in a state of vibration. Like vibration gives structure to things. So, when you have things that are stuck up in your body and you give yourself opportunity to stretch, you are opening up those energy channels so it can move a little more freely. That's why you do a yoga practice, even if you're not into the like super meditative aspect of it or whatever. If you're, doing a yoga practice, you're matching your breath to your movement, whatever, you leave there feeling like kind of floaty, right? Because like that energy, the chi, the life force energy, this connection to the Dao itself, right? It's able to move through you with less resistance. And that in and of itself is just so grounding.
That definitely helped me. especially when I was coming from such a disassociative state where I was constantly, leaving my body on purpose. Discovering yoga, I mean, going through that whole somatic experience, which is, I think telling you about it was us becoming friends and everything. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like after class was me becoming more connected with my body, and taking the cues. And now it's like, why does my stomach hurt? Am I hungry,
Mm-hmm.
or do I not like this person in the room? Am I
Mm-hmm.
triggered right now? Like, do I have a headache because I haven't been drinking enough water today, or do I have a headache because of several other reasons, like the aspect of my emotions having an actual effect on my body was revolutionized to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was something I never really considered.
And especially for ADHD, right? You're like,
Yeah,
oh shit, wait, now I know that if I'm kind of cranky, maybe it's because I haven't eaten or drinking in the past like
yeah,
7 hours. And then I'll do that. And I'm like, oh, I feel better.
yeah.
Instead of just being like, meow, meow, meow.
And then going through the practice, it was like discovering all of these, kinks and pains and stress in my body that were being released. And as it was being released, there was all this emotion coming out of it, just like
Mm-hmm.
this says in the book that you haven't read yet.
Mm-hmm.
There was all this emotion that's just like being released. Like I talk about this a couple of times on the podcast, but when I opened up my lower back, it was with you. I was doing like forward fold, and we had all the props like set up in that the whole studio had to offer, because I couldn't go beyond like I was at 180. I was still in an obtuse angle, and I needed to get to an acute angle. And you pushed a little. You literally just like tapped me a little bit, and then I just felt this like huge rush coming from my lower back,
Mm-hmm.
and it just consumed my entire body. And I left that class just completely renewed. I mean, for days and days, I could feel, it felt like I could feel the blood in my veins. I just could feel my skin was even more sensitive. I was crying constantly, but for a different reason than how I
Mm-hmm.
normally cry constantly. And it was, it was one of those things where I was like, wow, this is what they mean. And I brought it up to my therapist, and she was like, oh, have you heard of somatic therapy?
Mm-hmm.
And that was where I got introduced to it. And it felt so, I don't know, just relieving, because I wasn't trying to, I usually approach things very cerebral and try to like understand things on like a very, you just rolled your eyes at
Well,
that.
I mean, I feel like especially in American
Yeah, we're
society, it's
trained that way.
like analyze, figure
And
it
yeah,
out.
and I was like raised by a bunch of history buffs, and like everything had to be right. And, and so to have something happen to me that you can't describe, like we were talking about, like the awness of it, it was difficult for me to understand, and I wanted to tell everybody, but it's like, how do you tell someone that, except for being like, get down on the ground and try to touch your toes, and then I'm gonna, like, how do you get that across? And it was, just connecting with the body. And now it feels, I'm constantly doing these like physical checks just to see, where I'm at, even emotionally, because you get like you get trained to
Mm-hmm.
disassociate, but it's hard to the
And
body.
you're disassociating from your body.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so the body just brings you back right into that present space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you said that, because I think that that's one of the things that like is so important about the asana practice of yoga, right? Like you could be sitting, and that's what I noticed the most, especially in hip openers, was the tendency, like, what does resistance look like for me right here, right? Like when I'm feeling like kind of uncomfortable, right? Because I'm stretching, and like, I want it to be over because it's kind of uncomfortable, but I want to force myself to stay in it because I know that it's opening something up. Something's being moved through, something's being released. Like, obviously we wish the work was easy, but it's not easy. And that's what makes it transformative, is because it's not easy. And then just noticing how tuning into my breath, elongating the breath, softening other parts of my body, noticing, am I clenching my jaw? Am I like, tightening my shoulders or whatever it is? The process of like staying, in tune with your body and softening helps everything then release, which then gives you the mental and emotional release, which honestly, you don't even have to, sometimes you're like, oh, I understand, like, what this emotion is tied up in. And sometimes you're just like, I don't know why I'm crying, but apparently
Hmm.
I had to cry. And that's great. Like we don't cry enough. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but a lot of people do avoid it, and don't even realize, I think, that they're avoiding it. So it is important to be able to, and then, the idea that we are energy really starts to sink in deeper and deeper. When you feel the energetic channels in your body opening up, you feel, especially with acupuncture and stuff, you feel like the little pop. And like all of a sudden, like my shoulder was forward and now it just like slipped back into place. And I was like, I didn't even know it was out of place.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like we don't even know how much we're carrying and we're afraid to look at it. And then you get into the body, you realize how much you're carrying, and then everything else starts to come up. And that's great because it's all there to be looked at, to be held, to be processed, so that you can move on and again be reborn, be reborn, be reborn, feeling a little better, hopefully each time.
Yeah, it's definitely like being reborn. I mean, Tom, just to give you more context, like when I opened my lower back, it reminded me of when people talk about the rapture of of finding God, right? It was like when people have this like energizing kind of spirit take hold of them. I mean, I'm speaking purely from a Southern Gothic like Flannery O'Connor kind of aspect. I wasn't about to go to the river and get baptized, but I definitely like I was like, oh, this is what they mean, but in a yoga sense.
Mm.
And but it felt it's every time that I sit in a position for a very long time, or I feel that like slackening, like legs up the wall. I'll feel my hamstrings, this slackening kind of
Mm-hmm.
happening. It's such an immense experience. And there are times too where I'm like, is this like, am I letting go or do I need to fart? Like, what is like? It's hard to like decipher, and sometimes it's both.
That's fair. And it's honestly, and that's the thing too, is that it can, I mean, you feel it, but it can also be like very subtle, like legs up the wall, where you're like, oh, this feels good. And then you're kind of just there and it's nice and relaxing. And then like a couple minutes later, you're like, whoa, this feels way different than it did.
Hmm.
I haven't even done anything. I'm just laying here, but all of a sudden my body feels different. Um, and yeah, that just like, it just makes you more in touch. Um, and it forces you to reassociate.
Yeah, what y'all are making me think of is so it is kind of, I mean, it's more in the school of cerebral thought, but like the sacrament of confession is this way to approach unblocking. You are I think that it has um too much of a like a medieval uh, conjecture around it. Like people have this weird image of like going in and confessing to, eating too much or missing church or something, and like these small things that are just eating you up because something else has made you anxious about them.
Mhm.
But there's there's things that we carry that manifest physically that begin in our thinking, like anger, for one. Like carrying anger for too long is going to manifest physically.
Mhm.
um and the idea of confession in this sense where you admit to being angry and you talk about it with a spiritual guide, and you kind of unblock yourself. But then I was thinking, like, that's such a good first step where this if we do approach it in this way, like confession, this sacrament, then it almost necessitates having a physical um, action to follow it. Like having a conversation with a spiritual director or your priest or whatever, that's great. That's a good first step. But then how do we integrate? How do we associate this with our bodies? How do we come back to our bodies? We've unblocked this mental channel. How do we unblock the physical channel? Um, and I don't know, like that my there's a healing circle at my church. Jody, we talked about this, where we've been going through kind of we've been using the elements to talk about healing, like fire, water, and so on, and using them as modules to physically find ways to like embody that and get into like an intimate relation with our bodies so that healing can begin. And I just would wonder, like, I guess somatic therapy is so novel, like it's sort of new in the West, but I would be interested to see how that could be slowly integrated into institutions that have not had this approach in the past, where like how much healing could be done from applying a somatic orientation to this way of healing.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Maybe you
yoga
could
is
be
great.
the yoga priest, Tom. Maybe that's your goal.
Well, I think that what y'all are saying is so valuable. It's so important, and it's so it like it makes you be present in your body.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
It takes you out
Yeah,
of the past and the future. You know, like you can't be
right.
thinking about. I mean, I guess maybe you could be thinking about, what you're gonna have for dinner later. But like, if you're really in the practice and you're allowing yourself, because, and this is what I say too in practice, right? It's a conscious choice. To be present is a conscious choice, right? It's much easier to be, thinking about what's coming next, thinking about what you're embarrassed about you did yesterday or whatever it is. And so making that conscious choice to redirect your attention to the body, to redirect your attention to the breath, to redirect your attention over and over and over and over and over and over again. And eventually it feels less like a conscious choice because it becomes more of your baseline, right? But yeah, like being in the body helps you to just keep you there.
Yeah, that's the being in your body, being in the present. That's where all the work is done.
I think that's a good
Um,
place to
yeah.
wrap it up. All right, see you guys.
Okay, bye. Yoga. Yay, yoga. Yay, the
Wait, 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 wait.
Dao.
Before you stop the recording, uh, just can we wrap this with Asia's, like, all of her info?
Yeah, yeah.
Is this a
Like,
plug
where?
or is this like me
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about the
This is a
Dao?
plug. Where can we find you?
Oh
Like,
You
what?
can plug the
man.
Tao if you want to.
Yeah, all around.
You
Close your
check
eyes
out.
and go within.
Make sure to subscribe to the Tao
Um,
everywhere. Hit that like button.
um, let's see. I do have a website. It's always kind of partially done because I'm always changing things.
Just
But
like Taoism.
right, it's always a work in progress. There's never an end point. But if you want to go there, it's anastasia.com, which is spelled ANASTAJA.com. I teach in Chicago at Namaskar. So if you really want to come through Tuesday nights, Friday nights for restorative, Alexandra once again, and this is the Tao knocking on my door, being like, you gotta step up, you gotta embrace your gifts. It's a little side note. I saw, I work with someone and her screensaver was like something like, your talents are God's gift to you, and then what you choose to do with them is your gift to God, right? Like, and I just love that, like we're all here to do something. And right now, I thought I was going to be a famous fashion designer. That's not what ended up happening, but I really enjoy the work that I do, and I think it's important. So if you want to come through, we're going to be doing little Ganja Yoga Sunday nights. Yeah, but I have no dates for that yet. But she's been texting me about it, so that's good.
That's yoga and weed for people for the uninitiated.
Which is one of the ways that I deepened my restorative practice so much. If you need help getting out of your headspace, smoke a little weed and then get on your mat. And like, I wouldn't say like go do a hard vinyasa practice unless like, that's for you. It's not for me. I feel like I'm dying if I try to work out and smoke weed. But just to like chill out, relax, get into your body and kind of get to that mindless space where you actually give yourself genuine rest. That's not just sleeping. That's not just, turning on the TV or whatever it is. Genuine, constructive rest that's grounded in, just letting yourself be. You're so good at being the human part. Just let yourself be, the eternal, formless aspect of who you are. Oh, and I forgot, I'm an artist. So I teach metalsmithing classes at Lil Street. So you can come find me there too.
Yep. I think we might need to rebrand the podcast as a California sober podcast.
That's fair.
I think
Maybe.
people will pick that up.
I think they've already picked it up.
Yeah, I think they get it.
All right. So that's Anastasia Rhodes, yoga teacher, metalsmith, and Daoist.
I like that.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me. I was nervous, but I've been listening to your guys' podcast when I was driving back from Michigan, and it was keeping me company. And I kept wanting to say things, but obviously I wasn't on the podcast. But it was keeping me company, and I was agreeing with a lot of what you're saying. So
that's awesome. You can still just text. If you guys are listening to the podcast and you want to say something, just text me the time code and then I'll respond.
That's very fair.
All right. Have a good night or day or whatever time you're listening.